breaking news just in today. Buddy Hield, Pacers, looking for a trade after an extension is declined, and Buddy Hield did not like it. What happened? What comes next? What does this all mean? What are the key details? Who are the key teams to know? We've got a lot to cover on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, surprise change of plans. Throw out the small forwards preview for the season. It's all about Buddy Hield today because some breaking news came in on Wednesday from Shams Charania in The Athletic. Pacers, Buddy Hield have begun talks to find potential trade sources. That is the headline from Shams. How did this happen? What led to this? Why is this the direction that is being pursued potentially by the Pacers? What are all the factors at play? What comes next? And what could a trade look like if one ultimately happens? I'll try to cover all that today. There's a lot here. There's a lot in my head. There's a lot of my notes. I'm just going to try to say it all in a coherent way that makes a lot of sense because there's a lot to digest here because there's a big story and then a bigger story. And the bigger story is everything, but the big story to me is actually kind of the secondary part of what led to this, right? Shams Charania reports, after contract extension negotiations stalled out, Buddy Hield and the Indiana Pacers have started dialogue to work on finding a potential trade with another team. And then later in the story, he says the Pacers did offer Hield an extension in recent weeks, but it's believed their proposal did not make the 7-year guard feel desired, league sources said. So the big story to me that is leading to the bigger story is that they offered him an extension at all. And that is how we have gotten to this point, right? If you want to go back in time and remember, Kevin Pritchard said on the record when asked by Dustin Dopirak about a Buddy Hield extension in his end of season presser, right? He said, we love Buddy. There's some things that he does that's not on the court, the way he keeps practice light, but I think we've got to define his role next year. And if we can get a role where he's comfortable and we're comfortable, then I'm not opposed to it. Now, I'm not saying we're going to do it for sure, but I'm not opposed to it, right? So that, to me, listened to, if they can get role clarity and Buddy's all for it, then yeah, they'd be willing to extend him. So it sounds like maybe they had that, but the offer wasn't right, or maybe the extension and the role were in cahoots and were together as a part of a discussion with Buddy Hield, because for the first time today, the Pacers posted pictures from inside their practice facility of guys who are working out, and Buddy Hield was there, right? So he's in Indy. So presumably a meeting with the front office could have been had, or discussions could have been had, especially if an extension was recently offered. So to me, something happened conversationally between the Pacers with Buddy Hield, not only on an extension, but also about his role. And now we're here because clearly there was some dismay here from Hield's side. In fact, again, Shams reporting says it's believed the Pacers' proposal did not make the 7-year guard feel desired. Now, we don't know what this is. We don't know the number of years. We don't know the number of dollars offered, right? The Pacers, because of their cap space, can offer Hield some big extensions, right? If they did a renegotiation and extension, in theory, like they could offer him up to like $170 million over 4 years. That's insane. He's obviously not worth that. I'm not even suggesting he is. I'm just saying the Pacers circumstance with their cap space and with the new extension rules, like they can offer Hield any reasonable amount of money, right? So there's not like a financial hurdle in their way. Even normal veteran extensions, which other teams could offer Hield even on a trade, to me are more than reasonable. For a Hield deal. Hield's maximum value on a veteran extension would be 4 years added and a total of $116.5 million added to his contract. That's still an overpay to me for him at age 30. So there's a lot of legal extensions he could be offered. The question is what makes sense for the Pacers, what makes sense for Hield, and where to proceed from here. So that's the big story to me. An extension was offered within those parameters I just said. I don't know what it is. It has not been reported by anybody what it is. I tried to figure out, but couldn't get anything. What happens now is the natural follow-up to that, right? The bigger story is everything here, right? That the Pacers, and I've talked about this on the show. Caitlin and I talked about this in our season preview for the two guards last week, and it's been discussed a lot with Buddy, is that he was a likely trade candidate to me this season just because if you're the Pacers, you have some big salaries on your team, but he's a veteran. He's 30, and he's on an expiring contract. If you're not a championship or conference finalist contender, that's the type of player you look to trade. Even if you're decent, getting the long-term assets is usually more valuable. Buddy Hield has value to the Pacers, no doubt about it. Even adds to Tyrese Halliburton's effectiveness, right? The Pacers with Halliburton on and Hield off have a 115.2 offensive rating. With Hield and Halliburton, it was almost 120, right? That's 4 points better. Even Halliburton is better playing with Buddy Hield, right? The whole team has offensive boosts. They also have defensive disasters, and Hield is not a good defensive player at all, which limits his value, which is part of his value discussion, which is part of what teams will be willing to offer for him in trades. But he's certainly a good player for the Pacers. So that is certainly something to consider as we talk the rest of this through, is that the Pacers, by trading him, depending on what they get back, could be worse this year. And a year they're trying to get better. So there's a lot of dynamics at play here that make an extension tricky, that make a trade tricky, that just make everything kind of overlapping. And this just came out of completely nowhere. So why is this happening now? Well, maybe there was the extension offer a couple weeks ago and Hield came in town and there were more discussions. I don't know. I'm only guessing that him being in town matters just because I've seen the picture of him there, and I don't know when he was or wasn't in Indy. Maybe it's that he got role clarity and he didn't like it. I don't know exactly what led to this coming now, why right now is the time this happened. Truly, for the Pacers, this being 2 weeks before camp is good and bad. It's good because there is time before camp to either smooth it out in one direction or the other or find a trade. And it's bad because that's not a lot of time before training camp, right? Their first preseason game is in less than 2 weeks. Training camp starts in like 10 days. So there's a lot to come here. There's more from Shams, I think, that's important to kind of set the scene as we continue here. One thing he reported is Hield is open to a trade elsewhere, according to rival team sources, but no deals imminent, and there aren't current substantive talks with any other team. So 2 things to note there. One, Shams says via rival team sources that this is not a Pacers source saying that Hield is open to a trade elsewhere. I'm sure he has good info. It's just that's a little bit of important context, but I still would believe that Hield would be open to a trade elsewhere because he can be extended anywhere with a veteran extension. Even if he gets traded, he could be at some point this season. And that's relevant because he's probably looking at maybe his last big contract coming up. And so if he gets to a team that is a little more financially strained than the Pacers, that either keep Buddy Hield or lose him for nothing in a different way because they're over the cap and they're in the bird rights trap, which the Pacers would not be, that's more significant. They might be more inclined to keep him, or he might just be looking for a situation where he fits a little better, or can, all sorts of stuff, because the Pacers have these ascending other guards and added Bruce Brown. So that's important that Hield would be thinking about that. Now, also, it's important to note that, again, no deals imminent per Shams, and there aren't any current substantive talks with any other team. That could be because of how close camp is. That could be because of Hield's value. There's a lot of ways that could go, but Shams does add later. Multiple teams are expected to express interest in a possible Hield trade, and those conversations are expected to continue as NBA training camps open up over the next 2 weeks. I believe the first camp starts on the 28th, which is a week from today. So this could speed up very quickly, but that's all, again, important details to note when looking at this, is that currently nothing's going on according to Shams, but this could certainly speed up, and Hield's involvement is fascinating here. So this truly is the big story, is that an extension was offered. And I think that is how we got here, is that Hield not like that offer. We've heard this with Sabonis before with the Pacers, and Sabonis ultimately did end up extending, but there was restricted free agency as a backdrop when that was happening. That's not the case here. Buddy Hield's an unrestricted free agent after this season. And if you're the Pacers, maybe even if you didn't get the role clarity with Hield you wanted as the Pacers, offering an extension now at the price you're willing to pay. Again, I don't know what they offered. It's not been reported, but if you offer right now what you're willing to pay, or close to the top of what you're willing to pay, and Buddy Hield says no, or as Shams reported, it is believed he did not feel desired, then that's good information to know as the Pacers, because then you're not going to keep him beyond the season, barring a situational change. And so now you can explore those trades now before the season, or at least figure out what you can do in the interim before you have to seriously explore those come February. So there's a lot of timing elements here. There's a lot to this, but Buddy Hield apparently on the trade market. You can read about what all the extensions can look like. I wrote a whole story on this on Pacers SI, just because there's a lot to it. It's a lot of money involved. The Pacers have plenty of means to keep him long term, and they have plenty of cap space next summer, which maybe they don't want to dance into, but there's a lot of dynamics at play there that I think are fascinating. But let's talk about the next steps of this, right? Extension options, trade options, what the Pacers have to consider, all sorts of stuff that even Buddy Hield will have to consider, because this is a big deal for the Pacers, and how they figure out where they want to send or what teams are interested in Buddy Hield is the logical next steps that have to be considered. We can talk trades and extensions in segment 2 here. Really quickly before we get to that, though, I got to talk to you guys about Jase Medical, who make the Jase case, which provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use, and it's super easy to get. You can just fill out a simple form online, and boom, it'll help you out. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you the peace of mind, so you're not just hoping you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you actually have it in hand, and Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared in a medical emergency. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA, presumably we'll have more on this. Some of our other Locked On shows will probably have a segment on should this team trade for Buddy Hield. Check out any of those to hear what other teams are saying about this and what the value could be. Locked On Grizzlies host Joe Mullinax tweeted a potential Grizzlies offer for Hield, and I thought, quite frankly, that the offer he had was too much. It was more than I think Hield's price will be. We will get to what I think his price will be in a second. So there's a lot of stuff to consider here, right? Buddy Hield presumably would like to be on a team where he can play and play a lot. And maybe he can play a lot on the Pacers as like that 6th starter role where he's not technically starting but plays a lot. But if he starts and plays a lot, or gets to a team that's financial situation incentivizes them to keep him more, I think that could be important to him in a contract year, especially because I think he takes some pride in having that starting role. And who knows exactly what the Pacers think his role should be this year. We'll see. But all that money part of this is meaningful for a 30-year-old who could be staring at his last significant contract. Now, from the Pacers side, this could go a number of different ways going forward. I think let's start down the extension path, right? Do I think it's dead in the water that an extension could have with Buddy Hield? The fact that the Pacers were willing to offer something certainly means that the answer has to be no, right? Because the team side, the team that has to make the offer and submit the paperwork and all that, it is apparently reportedly willing to do so, right? So if they change what they're willing to offer ever so slightly, or if Hield says, you know what, maybe that offer is good for me because, you know, I like it here, I like my role here, whatever, like things could change on many sides. Yeah, that could still happen, but something would have to materially change. And I don't know what that is because I don't know what the offer is, and I don't know what Hield didn't like about it, whether that's the years, the dollars, everything, who knows? So there's a lot at play here that makes that hard to predict. But if the Pacers were willing to offer something, perhaps the extension is not totally dead, like we saw with Sabonis in 2019, if you'll remember, right? He did that whole presser. It was a huge deal where he said, you know, I know how they feel about me now, and we'll have to proceed forward and figure out how this goes. And I did a radio hit the next day with Derek Schultz on Fox and with Schultz and Query, and we were asked about the Sabonis thing. And while we were talking, it got done, right? Like, things have changed in the past for extensions to actually happen. Now, that was a rookie scale extension. It was different, but still, that doesn't mean it's impossible that an extension is dead. But something would have to materially change from what's been reported. Either the Pacers would have to offer more, and that would be a different report, or Buddy Hield would have to have expectations change to the point that he feels desired by the offer. That's the phrasing Shams used, so I'm going to keep using it. But I think the most likely thing to discuss going forward is the trade options part of this, actual deals and what that looks like, not because Hield would or wouldn't be extended in the likelihood of that, but more because that's been the likely outcome to me for a long time here, right? If you are a team that is younger and building, right? 30-year-olds, yeah, they're valuable. Having good players is important. The Pacers want to make the playoffs this year. Tyrese Halliburton made that clear. TJ McConnell said that. Jordan Nwora said that. They've alluded to wanting to be better, right? Kevin Pritchard talked about getting the itch to trade for a star player. Like, all these little things that have been said over the last 7-8 months, whatever, since the start of this year, have suggested the Pacers think they're ready to take a step forward and be better this year, right? And Buddy Hield is good, and he helps you in that way. So maybe you're happy having him on your team if you're the Pacers, but also their core, a lot of the season is going to be about more than just winning games. Halliburton's 23 right now. Matherin is super young in his second season. Jarris Walker going to be in the rotation. He's a rookie. Obi Toppin in his fourth year. Aaron Nesmith possibly in the rotation. In fact, Buddy Hield traded certainly in the rotation in his fourth year. Andrew Nembhard in his second year. Lots of backup center TBD, but maybe a guy with not a lot of experience, right? They're still a growing team despite their expectations. And I think that is probably more thematic of their season than wanting to win, right? Their offseason kind of toggled between the two. They made 2 first-round draft picks, but they signed Bruce Brown, but they traded for Obi, who's younger. Like, they clearly kind of value both paths. And so both paths would suggest that you can't just hold on to Buddy Hield and lose him for nothing, even if the return is minimal. That's why I've talked about that, not a lot, but, when the opportunity has arisen on this show and on Radio Hits this summer, because it makes sense to me that the Pacers would think that way, right? Rick Carlisle even said this last year. He alluded to this. I've added a lot of context before getting to what everybody wanted to hear. I apologize for that. But he even said when they extended Miles Turner, and it was at the trade deadline, he said, we didn't do a lot. We didn't need to do a lot. We aren't a team that was in a situation to be splashy at the trade deadline. And then he said, if we hadn't extended Miles, things would have been different, right? Because Turner was on an expiring contract and they had to think about the future. It's the same with Buddy. Miles is a better player, but it's the same situation. So they've acknowledged it very recently that players on expiring contracts, that their situation requires some sort of consideration at the trade deadline. So what would a Buddy Hield trade look like? Good question. The place to start, and the first thing, the most important thing to discuss, is the salary cap, as usual. The Pacers have 7.5-ish million of maximum cap space, so they can take back about 26-ish million in a Buddy Hield trade and just take that player in straight up, or if it's 2 players, whatever, they can do that. That's important to note. If you're a different team who's like, oh, this shooter could really help us, and you're kind of willing to offload money too, perhaps there is a deal to be struck that actually makes sense, right? And I think there's a lot of teams that would look at, in the new CBA especially, an expiring contract of a very valuable player as a player that makes sense for them. Like, I think Hield's going to have a market if he's truly just shopped around, right? And so that is one place to start for the Pacers. They can take back some money. It's not that much different than the salary matching for Hield if they were over the cap anyway, but that is still important to note for them in terms of reaggregating those players or flipping them or what that all could look like. The second thing to note is the salary floor, the other direction, because the Pacers probably do not want to dip below that before the season starts. And they're 6-ish million over the floor in terms of salaries. So they have to take back at least 13-ish million in a trade if they send out Hield, just to make sure, maybe a little closer to 12.5 million. But that's just to make sure they're still above the floor, 90% of the salary cap entering the season. So a lot of frameworks make sure, if you see fake trades or you see frameworks, that the Pacers are within those boundaries, because that is the smartest way for them to use their assets, is to remain in that range. Now, what is Hield's value? What teams make sense? There's a plethora of ways I could actually take this, because the Pacers space is the start here, but there's a lot of other directions to go here. So his shooting is so valuable that is where I will start and say, any team that you're going to look for teams that really need shooting. And that seems obvious, but a big thing for the Lakers last year, right, when they were reportedly interested in Hield and there was all those 2 firsts plus Russ for Turner plus Buddy stuff, was that he could really shoot, and the Lakers needed that. And the Lakers finished last season 24th in three-point percentage at 34.6%. But during that time, a lot of the chatter was, wow, Buddy Hield would be great on the Lakers, playing off of AD, playing off of LeBron. He's going to get open shots, and he's going to provide spacing for both those 2 guys and the rest of the team. And that is where he can be really valuable. He plays so well off of Tyrese Halliburton already because of a lot of those things. He set the Pacers franchise record for threes made in his only full season so far with the franchise. He knocked down a crazy number of threes last year and shot 42.5%, over 40% for his career on about 8 attempts per game. That's insane. 4,200 threes in his career, over 40%. He is an elite shooter, and he pairs well with really any team. But if you're a contender and you need spacing, man, you've got to be looking at this guy, right? And that's where I think you'll have a market, is that of the teams last season that finished bottom 10 in three-point percentage, sure, there's some crummy teams in here, but 5 of them made the playoffs, and at least 3 of the ones that didn't would like to this coming season. And in the bottom half of the league in three-point percentage last year, a lot of them made the playoffs. Like, a lot of teams make sense to me. And so I think there's going to be a market. Who are my favorite teams to look for here? The actual contender types, and I'll explain why in a second. why their draft picks are the perfect value to me, but because they're going to have the right value draft pick, right? Later in the first round, I think is going to be what this shakes out to be. So if Miami had their picks, they would be ideal. But ironically, the Lakers, but their pick situation is kind of dire. The Grizzlies, they were 22nd in three-point percentage last year, although they have Luke Kennard. The Raptors is a really good one to me. They need shooting really bad. They're going to be relying a lot on Grady Dick for it. They could be one that's interesting, especially if they would like to make the playoff. They don't have their first-round pick this coming year. Charlotte, if they would like to take a step forward, and Houston, these teams stand out to me, but really I'm just kind of reading through the bottom of the list here. If Bogdan Bogdanović was healthier, I think the Hawks would not make sense, but they have defensive concerns also, but Bogdanović misses time, and they are certainly a team that could use some more shooting on the roster. And the Knicks are another one that makes some sense to me, although the salary matching there could be a little tricky. So those are some of the teams that stand out. What is Buddy Hield's trade value? What could that actually look like as we push forward? We'll talk about that in the final segment of today's show, because I have some thoughts, some comparative trades from the past that some people might make fun of, but I think they're important in establishing value in these discussions. Before we do that, though, got to quickly talk to you guys about the great people over at Birddogs who make my favorite pants and shorts out there. I have 4 pairs of shorts and 1 pair of pants and a tumbler and a hat. So I can hold up the hat right here. It's actually right under my desk. Birddogs, fantastic brand. You got to try them out. They make stretch khaki shorts and pants that are designed to fit slimmer through your thigh and your leg and give you a more sculpted look, which is great, of course. But they do the exact same thing as Lululemon and fit way better, right? The thing that makes them fit better is like khaki shorts, for example, are made of this stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs says, they fixed that problem, and they invented their own cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit. But you don't have to sacrifice your movement at all. And they have this anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I wore them walking around New York City for 3 straight days. I wore 3 different pairs, barely sweat at all, super comfy, no issues at all. They're functional for so many occasions, right? I've done golfing before, obviously walking in the city, a date. You've got to try them. You absolutely have to. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter the promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout for a free Birddogs water bottle with your order. I got to get one of those. And that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. I can promise you that. Back here on Locked On Pacers, talking Buddy Hield reportedly on the trade market after an extension. Talks have stalled with the Pacers. You can read more from Shams Charania in The Athletic. 2 stories up for me so far on Pacers SI. More to come potentially, depending on how inspired I am to make up fake stuff. It's not my favorite thing, but we'll try. I just named some teams that make sense to me. Of course, any team that needs shooting is going to make sense, right? And that's a lot of teams in the league. 3-point shooting is valuable. Doug McDermott, who's worse than Buddy Hield, got $13 million a year from the Spurs because he can shoot, because he can provide spacing, because he makes a team's offense better in that way. So what is Buddy Hield's trade value? What actually is it? What can the Pacers hope to get? That's a good question. It's tricky because of his contract being expiring, right? Some teams could view him as a rental. I don't know that, but let's look at some recent comparative trades that make sense to me. One, we will start with Houston Rockets, Dallas Mavericks. Just before the 2022 NBA draft, Christian Wood to the Mavs from the Rockets. Christian Wood, fantastic offensive player, not a very good defensive player, sort of fitting in that way. And he got traded to the Mavs for Boban Marjanovic, Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, Marquise Chris. Of those players, Boban stuck on the team. The other 3 were waived, right? So 1 neutral value player, unless you think Boban's a positive value player. And the 26th overall pick, which became Wendell Moore and was flipped to Minnesota. So a late first and 1 rotation player / vet was what Christian Wood fetched 2 years ago. Now his value has apparently, given his salary, dropped since then. But that is the first trade that I thought of that I was like, okay, that is a decent comp for Buddy Hield's current situation. The second one I went to happened last season at the trade deadline, this past February, right? So just 7 months ago. The Knicks and Blazers made a trade. It was Josh Hart going from the Blazers to the Knicks, and the Knicks sent Cam Reddish. Well, you can say what you want about him. He's a minimum player. Ryan Arcidiacono, Svi Mikhailuk, who got rerouted to Charlotte, and a first-round pick in 2023. That pick became the 23rd pick, which Portland used to select Chris Murray. Josh Hart was on an expiring contract. He just signed, he could have been. He picked up a player option this summer and then signed an extension with the Knicks. So expiring contract, 2 guard, close to the level of Buddy Hield, went for Cam Reddish, who was like, I guess, a flyer, although Portland didn't like him enough to keep him. Arcidiacono, Svi Mikhailuk, and a first-round pick in the 20s. Another one that popped up in my head was DeAnthony Melton. DeAnthony Melton from the Grizzlies to the 76ers. This happened near the draft last year as well, June 24th, 2022 to be exact. DeAnthony Melton went from the Grizzlies to the Sixers in exchange for Danny Green, who was injured at the time and out for at least 4 months, and the number 23 also pick that became big body David Roddy. So there's 3 trades of players. Say what you want. I really like Melton, so I'm a little biased here, but I think Josh Hart on his contract situation is probably the best comp of all these guys. And then you can fall back a little bit more in terms of Wood and Melton, but they got late first plus a tiny bit more, right? Danny Green, I guess, was with the Grizzlies for a second there, but he ended up with Cleveland. Cam Reddish was with Portland and did okay, but now he's with the Lakers, right? None of the guys in the Christian Wood trade, except for Boban, even stuck, right? So generally the late first was the appeal, or the pick in the 20s. And I've started there in my head because, if you go back a year to the Lakers stuff, right? Russell Westbrook was viewed as this negative value contract, significantly so. But it was for Turner and Hield, and it was 2 firsts, and Miles Turner is worth more than 1 Lakers first. So Buddy Hield was, kind of valued as less than a first in that instance, depending on the protection. So a late first made sense to me. He's definitely worth positive value, right? As that shooter, definitely worth maybe a decent amount of positive value. The trouble is the timing here, right? A lot of teams are set coming into camp, and shaking things up is tricky, and sending away assets is tricky. So finding the team that's willing to do that, despite having spent all their summer planning and having their roster set up in a specific way, is a little tricky, right? That's why I think the value being a little lower is potentially possible. But that is where I think his value is close to, is a late first, or like a higher in the 20s pick, like 23 was in 2 of the trades I just named, and then like a one other like rotation-y / outside the rotation-y thing, probably outside the rotation-y given the comparisons I just made. Maybe you think all 3 of those players are much better than Buddy Hield, and then you think he's not worth that much. I guess I get that, but I think he played very well last year. He's extremely durable, and he would fit well on a lot of good teams. And now I can connect what I said last segment about the good teams to what I was just saying. Conveniently for this exercise, good teams typically have worse picks that are closer to the back of the first round. So it makes sense that good teams would have the value that I just described to kind of run through this exercise. But again, Hield is durable. Hield's going to make his threes. He can do a little more now, right? That was something that happened when he got to the Pacers that stood out to me, is he was a better rebounder right away. He was a better passer right away with the Pacers. And some of that like tapered off a little bit, but his rebounding per game was above his career average with the Pacers, despite barely playing more minutes per game. His assists per game were above his career average with the Pacers, right? Significantly so, actually. And he still was scoring efficiently and making his threes, right? Like a lot of stuff he did a little bit better coming to Indiana. Like he is a little bit more than just a shooter. He's he can shoot in so many ways, and he's going to be valuable to so many teams. And a lot of the teams that in theory he makes sense on could have picks that make sense here. As for fake trades, it's not really my thing, but what I would say is look for teams that have another big salary themselves, because matching salaries is important here. And the tricky part of matching salaries for the Pacers is they have a full team. So if a team wants to send 2 players for Buddy Hield who make less than him, that makes sense, but then the Pacers have to cut one of them. So then the asset cost from that other team goes up, and then all of a sudden maybe it doesn't make as much sense. So a player who makes, an individual one player who makes between, let's say, $13 million and $25 million coming to the Pacers along with the asset is what makes the most sense. So if it's a worse player and the contract is worse, the asset would be better. And if it's a better player, the asset would be worse. And if you're the Pacers, you have a full rotation already, right? So you're not desperate to get a rotation player in this. So the pick or the asset might be more important. So how they figure this out is going to be tough, right? Maybe they circle back to many of the other rumors they had throughout the offseason, right? DeAndre Hunter was one, Pascal Siakam, obviously, but that's a much, much bigger trade than just Buddy Hield. I'm forgetting many of them somehow right now, but they got linked to a bunch of guys. And so maybe they circle back on those now that they have a different circumstance with their roster and team. But that's what I think Hield's value is. Those are the teams I think would be interested in him. And those are what I think the next steps are, is perhaps because they were willing to extend an extension offer in the first place, that could continue to be the case, but given that it seems like Hield's role could be changing with Bruce Brown in the mix, with Ben Mather and ready for more opportunity, given that he is heading into a contract year and a big one, given his career arc, given the Pacers' goals for the year, given Hield's value, I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that the next steps in this could be a trade. The question is when, right? And the question also that I haven't even gotten to yet is Hield like distraught and angry, or is Hield just dissatisfied with an extension offer, right? Is he close enough with his teammates, or is he happy enough in Indiana to go, I hate that extension offer, I'm not signing it, but I'll still play and be Buddy Hield? That would be a big deal for the Pacers, right? Because then they could roll into the season with him, and they have till February to figure it out, but at least their team could be what they thought it would be. If he is so discontent that it's a problem, and I don't think that's the case, just knowing Buddy Hield, but who knows, then that is actually a problem that has to be solved a little quicker. Presumably we'll get more information on this soon-ish, perhaps from some other reporting, perhaps something else comes out. We will see. Of course, we'll break it all down here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. In the absence of more information that is worth talking about significantly in the next day, tomorrow's show will be the small forward season preview episode with Caitlin. We already did Buddy Hield's, so you can go listen to that, I suppose, but it has changed, of course, a little bit. So lots coming here. We got Dan Favale. That'll be pushed back to next week, talking about Pacers players in the top 100 list who could move in there. We'll get to news and stuff, and then we'll be so close to the season that everything will be coming. So lots coming here on Locked On Pacers. Lots of really fun stuff coming. But until more Buddy Hield info comes in, we will see what happens with that. You can find more on Pacers SI as well. I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East. This podcast is on Twitter at Locked On Pacers. Thank you all for listening today. Have a good one. We'll see you soon.